The fluorescent lights in my auto shop buzzed like angry wasps at 11:30 p.m., casting harsh shadows across the concrete floor stained with 20 years of motor oil and broken dreams. I was elbow deep in the engine of Mrs. Henderson's ancient Buick when my phone lit up on the workbench, displaying a text notification meant for my wife Elizabeth. Last night was unforgettable. My place again tomorrow? B. I stared at the screen, my wrench frozen in mid-turn. Either my wife of 15 years had developed a secret twin sister with a taste for late-night adventures, or my marriage had just run over a spike strip at full speed. The thing about living in Millbrook is that everyone knows everyone else's business, except apparently I didn't know my own. This faded mill town of 8,000 souls thrived on gossip like a vampire feeds on blood, and somehow the biggest story of the year had been happening right under my nose. I'm Nathan Cross, 38 years old, ex-Army mechanic who built Cross Auto Repair from nothing but calloused hands and stubborn determination. For 15 years, I'd been the blue-collar husband that Elizabeth's family tolerated like a persistent rash. Her mother, Diane, never missed an opportunity to remind me that I wasn't good enough for her precious daughter, the hotshot lawyer who'd recently made partner at Morrison, Blake and Associates. Setting down my wrench, I scrolled through Elizabeth's messages with hands that had diffused IEDs in Afghanistan, but now trembled reading texts about hotel room numbers and lunch meetings that ran suspiciously late. The evidence painted a picture clearer than high-definition television. My wife was cheating, and she wasn't even trying to hide it well. The contact was saved as B, but the phone number belonged to Bradley Morrison, her senior partner. I knew because I'd called that same number last Christmas when Elizabeth forgot her phone at the office holiday party. Brad had answered with the same smooth voice that probably whispered sweet lies into my wife's ear. My phone buzzed again. This time it was actually for me. Working late again? Don't wait up. Important client dinner. Liz. I laughed, a sound that echoed off the garage walls like a gunshot. Important client dinner at midnight on a Tuesday. Right. The only thing she was eating was a 5-course meal of betrayal with a side of lies. 20 minutes later, I was parked outside the Grandview Hotel downtown, watching my wife's silver BMW in the valet lot. The same car I'd spent 3 weekends detailing by hand, because she loved how it sparkled in the sun. Through the hotel bar's floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see them at a corner table. Elizabeth in her black power suit, leaning across the table toward Brad like he was sharing state secrets instead of discussing which room they'd defile next. Brad Morrison looked exactly like what he was, a predator in an expensive suit. 40 years old, silver hair, and the kind of practiced smile that convinced juries and apparently married women. He drove a cherry-red Porsche 911 that he parked in the same spot every day, waxed to showroom perfection. I didn't storm in screaming. That's what they'd expect from the dumb mechanic. Instead, I walked calmly to the valet stand, slipped the kid $20, and told him I needed to check something on the red Porsche. Amazing how a little cash and confidence can get you anywhere. The key I kept for emergencies, the one that opened stubborn oil drain plugs, worked perfectly on Brad's paint job. One long, deliberate scratch from headlight to taillight, right down to the metal. Then I pressed my grease-stained handprint onto his windshield, leaving a perfect black mark like a signature on a death warrant. Walking back to my truck, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Satisfaction. It was a small thing, petty even, but it was mine. For too long, I'd been the accommodating husband, the understanding partner, the man who made himself smaller so Elizabeth could shine brighter. My phone buzzed as I drove home. A photo of Brad's vandalized Porsche filled the screen, followed by a text from Elizabeth. "What did you do?" I pulled over and typed back, "Just making memories." The war had begun. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. The next morning brought the kind of autumn chill that cuts through your jacket and settles in your bones. I opened Cross Auto Repair at 7 a.m. sharp, same as I had every weekday for the past 12 years. The bell above the door chimed as my first customer shuffled in. Old Pete Martinez with his ancient Ford pickup that held together purely through prayer and duct tape. "Morning, Nate," Pete said, setting a coffee cup on my counter. "Heard there was some excitement at the Grandview last night." And there it was. In Millbrook, news traveled faster than gossip, and gossip traveled at light speed. Pete's knowing grin told me the story of Brad's keyed Porsche had already made the rounds at Murphy's Diner, the town's unofficial information exchange. "Don't know what you're talking about, Pete," I said, but I couldn't keep the smirk off my face. "Course not," Pete winked. "Just saying whoever did it has good taste in targets. That Morrison fellow thinks he owns this town." By noon, I'd had 6 customers mention the mysterious vandalism, each with barely concealed delight. Brad Morrison wasn't popular in Millbrook. His law firm had foreclosed on half the businesses on Main Street during the recession, and people have long memories in small towns. My best friend Jules Brennan stopped by around lunch with sandwiches from his bar, the Rusty Anchor. Jules was my age, built like a linebacker, and had the kind of loyalty that made him dangerous to cross. We'd known each other since high school, back when we both thought we'd conquer the world instead of just trying to survive in it. "So," Jules said, unwrapping his sandwich, "Elizabeth's been making some interesting friends lately." "Is that so?" "Word is, she and Morrison have been having a lot of private meetings. Very private. Very long meetings." I took a bite of my sandwich, chewing slowly. People talk. They sure do. They also notice things. Like how her car was at the Grandview until past midnight 3 times this week. Jules had always been my sounding board, the friend who told me hard truths when I needed to hear them. Now he was telling me something I already knew, but hearing it from someone else made it real in a way that hurt like a physical blow. "What are you going to do about it?" he asked. "Nothing illegal," I said, "but nothing says I have to make their lives easy." Jules grinned. "Don't get even, Nate. Get creative." That afternoon, I made some phone calls. Brad's wife, Patricia, was a member of the Millbrook Garden Club, the same organization that had blackballed Elizabeth 3 years running. Amazing how a few carefully worded concerns about inappropriate workplace relationships could spread through social circles like wildfire. I also placed an anonymous tip to the Morrison, Blake & Associates Human Resources Department about potential ethics violations. Nothing specific, just enough to plant seeds of doubt about their golden boy's professional conduct. Elizabeth came home that evening like a storm cloud, all sharp edges and barely contained fury. She slammed her briefcase on the kitchen counter, hard enough to rattle the windows. "We need to talk," she said. "About what?" "Don't play dumb, Nathan. I know you vandalized Brad's car." I looked up from the newspaper I was reading, the picture of innocent confusion. "That's a serious accusation, Liz. You got any proof?" Her face flushed red. "You left your handprint on the windshield. Lot of mechanics in this town. Lot of greasy hands. This isn't a game." I folded the newspaper carefully, taking my time. "You're right. Games have rules." That weekend was our daughter Emma's 16th birthday. Elizabeth had planned a family dinner at Chez Laurent, the fanciest restaurant in Millbrook's tiny downtown. The kind of place where the portions were small, the prices were large, and the waiters looked at you like you were personally offending them by existing. Emma was excited, dressed in the blue dress Elizabeth had bought her for the occasion. My daughter was beautiful, smart, and thankfully had inherited more of my common sense than her mother's ambition. She still hugged me like I was her hero instead of the family disappointment. We were halfway through appetizers when Brad Morrison walked in. "What a coincidence," Elizabeth said, her voice pitched just a little too high. "Brad, what are you doing here?" Brad approached our table with the confidence of a man who owned the world and was considering buying another one. "Elizabeth and Nathan, good to see you." He didn't look like a man whose car had been vandalized 3 days earlier. He looked like a man who was enjoying a private joke at my expense. "Join us," Elizabeth said, already pulling out a chair. "It's Emma's birthday." Emma looked uncomfortable, glancing between her parents with the kind of awareness that teenagers develop when their world starts shifting beneath their feet. I squeezed her hand under the table. "Happy birthday, Emma," Brad said, settling into the chair next to my wife. 16 is a special age, the age when you start seeing the world as it really is. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison," Emma replied politely, but I could see the confusion in her eyes. The dinner became a carefully choreographed dance of subtle insults and hidden meanings. Brad and Elizabeth exchanged looks that lasted just a moment too long. They shared inside jokes that excluded Emma and me. When Brad complimented Elizabeth's new perfume, I nearly choked on my wine. "So Nathan," Brad said, cutting into his steak with surgical precision, "I hear business is good at the shop." "Can't complain. People always need their cars fixed." "Must be satisfying, working with your hands. Very blue-collar." The way he said it made it sound like a disease. "Someone has to do the real work," I replied. "Can't all sit behind desks pushing papers around?" Elizabeth shot me a warning look, but I was past caring about keeping the peace. "True enough," Brad smiled, "though some of us prefer to use our minds rather than just our muscles." Emma was staring at her plate now, the birthday joy completely drained from her face. This was supposed to be her special day, and these two narcissists were turning it into their personal battlefield. "You know what I love about working with my hands?" I said, my voice conversational, but my eyes locked on Brad's. "When something's broken, I fix it. When something's dirty, I clean it. And when something doesn't belong..." I paused, letting the silence stretch. "I remove it." Brad's smile faltered for just a moment, but Elizabeth jumped in before the tension could explode. "More wine, anyone?" The rest of the dinner passed in strained politeness, but the damage was done. Emma barely spoke. Brad looked like he was calculating the distance to the nearest exit, and Elizabeth kept shooting me looks that could have melted steel. As we left the restaurant, Brad made a show of kissing Elizabeth's cheek goodbye. "See you Monday, partner," he said, emphasizing the last word like it had multiple meanings. "Looking forward to it," Elizabeth replied, her hand lingering on his arm. I was loading Emma into my truck when my phone buzzed. A text from Sullivan, Elizabeth's best friend since law school. "You don't know the real story. Watch your back." I showed the message to Jules later that night at the Rusty Anchor. He read it twice, frowning. "What do you think she means?" he asked. "I think," I said, finishing my beer, "that this thing is bigger than just my wife cheating with her boss." "How much bigger?" I looked around the bar, at the faces of people I'd known my whole life, people who trusted me to fix their cars and keep their secrets. "Big enough to destroy everything." Jules signaled for another round. "Then we better make sure you destroy them first." The next 2 weeks passed like the calm before a hurricane. Elizabeth grew colder and more distant, spending longer hours at the office and shorter moments at home. When she did speak to me, it was with the kind of clinical detachment she usually reserved for hostile witnesses. I kept myself busy at the shop, but my mind was working overtime. Jules was right about getting creative. Brad Morrison thought he was untouchable, protected by his money and position. Elizabeth thought she was smarter than the small-town mechanic she'd married. They were both about to learn how wrong they were. My first move was creating a fake social media account under the name Millbrook Watcher and posting some carefully worded observations about certain lawyers who couldn't keep their hands to themselves. Nothing actionable, just enough to start people talking. In a town like Millbrook, talk was currency, and I was about to make myself very rich. The rumors started small, but grew like wildfire. Brad's wife, Patricia, began asking pointed questions at garden club meetings. The senior partners at Morrison, Blake and Associates, started paying closer attention to Brad's billable hours and client meetings. Elizabeth's promotion to senior partner, which had seemed like a sure thing, suddenly hit mysterious delays. But they weren't going down without a fight. The ambush came on a Friday night at Chez Laurent, the same restaurant where Brad had crashed Emma's birthday dinner. Elizabeth had insisted we go there to work on our marriage, which should have been my first warning sign. The second warning should have been the crowd of familiar faces filling every table. Colleagues from her law firm, members of her book club, even her mother Diane, who'd driven down from the state capitol. I realized what was happening when Elizabeth stood up, tapping her wine glass with a knife to get everyone's attention. The conversations died away until the only sound was the soft jazz playing through the restaurant's speakers. "Thank you all for coming tonight," Elizabeth began, her voice carrying the same confident tone she used in courtrooms. "I know this is unusual, but I wanted to share something important with the people who matter most to me." My stomach dropped. This wasn't a dinner. It was an execution. "For 15 years, I've been married to Nathan Cross," she continued, gesturing toward me like I was evidence in a criminal trial. "And for 15 years, I've tried to help him grow, to become the man I knew he could be." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I could see people leaning forward, hungry for the drama about to unfold. But sometimes, despite our best efforts, people show us who they really are. Nathan has become bitter, paranoid, and frankly, dangerous. He's been stalking my colleagues, vandalizing their property, and making our home a place of fear rather than love. The lies came so smoothly, I almost admired the performance. Almost. I've tried to protect him, to cover for his increasingly erratic behavior, but I can't do it anymore. I won't sacrifice my career, my reputation, or my safety for a man who refuses to help himself. She paused for effect, letting her words sink in. The crowd was eating it up, nodding along with her narrative of the poor, successful woman trapped by her unstable husband. "So tonight, in front of all of you, I'm announcing that I'm filing for divorce. I'm choosing to move forward with my life, to surround myself with people who support my dreams rather than trying to tear them down." The applause started slowly, but built to a crescendo. Elizabeth basked in it like a flower turning toward the sun. Her mother Diane was actually crying tears of joy. Brad Morrison, sitting at a corner table, raised his wine glass in a subtle toast. When the clapping finally died down, Elizabeth looked at me expectantly. This was my cue to slink away in shame, to confirm her story by acting like the broken man she'd painted me as. Instead, I stood up slowly, straightening my jacket. The restaurant fell silent again, everyone waiting to see how the defeated husband would respond to his public humiliation. "That was beautiful, Liz," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the hushed room. "Really moving. You always were good with words." I looked around at all the faces staring at me. Some sympathetic, some curious, some openly hostile. These people thought they knew the story. They thought they understood who was the victim and who was the villain. "Since we're sharing truths tonight," I continued, "I guess I should contribute something too." Elizabeth's confident smile wavered slightly. "See, what my wife didn't mention is that she's been sleeping with her boss for the past 6 months." Gasps echoed through the restaurant. Elizabeth's face went white as paper. "And what she really didn't want you to know," I said, my voice getting louder, "is that I've been sleeping with her mother." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. Then Diane Morrison let out a strangled cry and collapsed back into her chair. Elizabeth made a sound like she was choking. Someone's wine glass shattered against the floor. Diane and I have been meeting every Tuesday at the Grandview Hotel for 3 months, I continued, enjoying the way Elizabeth's carefully constructed world was crumbling around her. Room 247. She pays cash, by the way. Very discreet for a woman her age. Diane was hyperventilating now, her face cycling between red and purple. That's not... Nathan, how could you... How could I what, Diane? Give you what your husband never could? You didn't seem to mind when you were screaming my name loud enough to wake the neighbors. Elizabeth suddenly lurched toward the bathroom, one hand clamped over her mouth. The sound of her retching carried clearly through the restaurant's thin walls. You're lying, Diane whispered, but her voice carried no conviction. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a photo I'd taken specifically for this moment. Diane's distinctive silver Cadillac parked outside the Grandview Hotel, timestamp clearly visible. Want to see the others? I've got some real interesting shots from inside the room. The photo was fake, of course, photoshopped together from a dozen different sources. But Diane didn't know that, and her guilty conscience filled in the blanks. She let out a wail that sounded like a dying animal and fled toward the exit. The restaurant had erupted into chaos. People were shouting, phones were recording, and Brad Morrison was trying to disappear into the wallpaper. Elizabeth stumbled back from the bathroom, her makeup streaked down her cheeks, just in time to see her mother's dramatic exit. You bastard, she hissed at me. You lying, psychotic bastard. Funny thing about lies, Liz, I said, pocketing my phone. Sometimes they reveal more truth than the facts do. I dropped a $100 bill on the table and walked toward the door. As I passed Brad's table, I leaned down and whispered, Your turn's coming, counselor. By the time I reached my truck, 3 different people had already posted videos of the confrontation online. My phone was buzzing with notifications, but I ignored them all. I just detonated a nuclear bomb in the middle of my life, and I wanted to enjoy the silence before the fallout began. The next morning, Elizabeth's law firm placed her on administrative leave pending an investigation into her conduct. Brad Morrison's wife, Patricia, filed for divorce, citing adultery and emotional abuse. And Diane Morrison checked herself into a private clinic for exhaustion, which was rich people speak for having a nervous breakdown. The videos from the restaurant had gone viral, shared thousands of times across social media with captions like, Husband's epic revenge, and cheating wife gets destroyed. Elizabeth's carefully cultivated reputation as Millbrook's golden girl lay in ruins, and I was the one holding the match. But Kara Sullivan's warning kept echoing in my mind. You don't know the real story. I was about to find out just how right she was. The week following the restaurant incident, Millbrook buzzed with gossip like a kicked hornet's nest. I couldn't walk down Main Street without people stopping to shake my hand or share their own stories about Brad Morrison's arrogance. The video of Elizabeth's public humiliation had been viewed over 50,000 times, and my phone rang constantly with interview requests from local news stations. I ignored them all. This wasn't about fame or sympathy. This was about justice. Elizabeth moved out of our house and into a furnished apartment across town. She'd taken Emma with her, which hurt more than I cared to admit, but my daughter was old enough to make her own choices. Emma still called me every night, confused and angry about the divorce, but she was starting to see her mother's true nature. Dad, she said during one of our conversations, Mom's been crying a lot, but she's also been on the phone with lawyers all the time. She keeps talking about taking everything you have. That didn't surprise me. Elizabeth was wounded and desperate, which made her dangerous. But I'd been planning for this moment longer than she realized. My next move was surgical and devastating. For years, I'd listened to Elizabeth complain about her job, venting about office politics and client problems. She'd told me things she shouldn't have, about padding expense reports, billing personal meals as client dinners, and claiming pro bono hours for work she'd never done. At the time, I'd thought it was just harmless griping. Now, it was ammunition. I compiled everything into a detailed report and sent it anonymously to the State Bar Association's Ethics Committee. Not enough to get her arrested, but more than enough to destroy her career. The investigation would take months, but the cloud of suspicion would follow her everywhere. Brad Morrison was proving harder to crack. He'd hired private security for his house and car after the vandalism incident, and he'd stopped frequenting his usual haunts. But everyone has weaknesses, and I'd found his. Pride. Brad loved his toys, the Porsche, his motorcycle, his vintage watch collection. He especially loved showing them off at the monthly Cars and Coffee meetup in the Millbrook town square. Rain or shine, Brad would be there every first Saturday, holding court among the other car enthusiasts and basking in their admiration. I spent 2 weeks preparing for the October meetup. Jules helped me acquire some very specific supplies: sugar packets from various restaurants, a small bottle of fish oil, and a remote-controlled device that looked like a car key fob, but served a very different purpose. Saturday morning arrived crisp and clear. The town square filled with classic cars, muscle cars, and expensive imports. Brad's new Porsche, he'd replaced the vandalized one within a week, sat in its usual prime spot near the fountain, gleaming like a red jewel. I arrived early with my own vehicle, a restored 1969 Camaro SS that I'd built from the ground up. It drew its own crowd of admirers, giving me the perfect cover to move around the event unnoticed. While Brad was distracted, explaining the finer points of German engineering to a group of teenagers, I went to work. The sugar went into his gas tank, not enough to cause permanent damage, just enough to make his engine run rough and unpredictable. The fish oil went into his air conditioning system, where it would create a smell that would linger for weeks. But the real masterpiece was the remote device, which I attached to the underside of his car with industrial magnets. It wasn't a bomb or anything dangerous, just a small speaker that could be activated from up to 100 yards away. I waited until Brad was giving his weekly speech about automotive excellence, surrounded by his usual audience of admirers. Then I pressed the button on my phone. The speaker began broadcasting a recording I'd made the night before. Brad's voice, taken from a deposition video I'd found online, edited and looped to say, "I'm a cheating piece of shit," over and over again. The effect was immediate and hilarious. Brad spun around, looking for the source of the voice, his face cycling through confusion, embarrassment, and rage. The crowd started laughing, thinking it was some kind of practical joke. When Brad tried to start his car to leave, the sugar-contaminated engine coughed and died. "Having trouble, Brad?" I called out innocently. He spotted me in the crowd, and his eyes filled with pure hatred. "What did you do?" "Me? I'm just here admiring the cars, though yours seems to be having some performance issues." The crowd was recording everything now, phones pointed at Brad like he was a circus act. The speaker was still broadcasting its message, and the smell of rotting fish was beginning to waft from his air conditioning vents. Brad tried to charge at me, but Jules materialized between us like a wall of muscle. "Careful there, counselor," Jules said mildly. "Assault charges would look bad on your record." By the time Brad got his car towed and the speaker removed, the damage was done. Videos of his meltdown were already spreading across social media, tagged with "Got a cheating piece of shit" and "Tyler Brad meltdown." His reputation as Millbrook's sophisticated lawyer was evaporating faster than water in the desert. But the real revelation came that afternoon, when Sullivan finally decided to show her hand. I was closing up the shop when she walked in, her high heels clicking against the concrete floor like gunshots. Kara was Elizabeth's best friend from law school, a sharp-featured woman with calculating eyes and a smile that never reached them. "Hello, Nathan," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We need to talk." "About what?" "About how you're going to stop this ridiculous campaign against Elizabeth and Brad." I laughed. "And why would I do that?" "Because you don't understand what you're dealing with. This isn't just about Elizabeth cheating on you. This is about something much bigger." She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo that made my blood run cold. Me, entering the Grandview Hotel 3 months ago. Not with Diane Morrison, That had been a lie designed to hurt Elizabeth. But with someone else entirely, someone whose identity would destroy me if it became public. You see, Nathan, I know about your little secret too, and unlike you, I have actual proof. The photo showed me with Rebecca Walsh, the 19-year-old daughter of Millbrook's police chief. Rebecca, who was technically legal but young enough to make me look like a predator. Rebecca, who had sought me out during a vulnerable moment and offered comfort that I'd been too weak to refuse. One phone call, Kara continued, and Chief Walsh will know exactly what kind of man has been sleeping with his daughter. One social media post, and you'll be the one getting death threats instead of sympathy. I stared at the photo, my mind racing. What do you want? I want you to back off. Stop the harassment, stop the pranks, and let Elizabeth and Brad rebuild their lives. And if I don't? Kara's smile turned predatory. Then I'll destroy you the same way you destroyed them. The only difference is, my evidence is real. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and Nathan? You might want to ask yourself who really orchestrated Elizabeth's affair in the first place. Who introduced her to Brad? Who encouraged their late-night meetings? Who's been pulling the strings this whole time? The door chimed as she left, and I stood alone in my shop, finally understanding the true scope of what I was facing. This wasn't just about a cheating wife and her arrogant lover. This was about revenge that went back years, orchestrated by someone who'd been playing a much longer game than I'd realized. Kara Sullivan had been planning this from the beginning, and I'd walked right into her trap. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated how far I was willing to go when my back was against the wall. The Millbrook Autumn Festival was the town's biggest event of the year, drawing thousands of visitors for food trucks, craft booths, and live music in the town square. It was also the perfect stage for what I had planned, a grand finale that would expose every lie, every betrayal, and every dirty secret that had been festering in the shadows. I'd spent the past week preparing, calling in favors and setting pieces in motion. Jules had helped me secure the sound system for the main stage, claiming we wanted to make an announcement about a charity drive for local veterans. The festival organizers were happy to give us 5 minutes between musical acts. What they didn't know was that I'd been gathering evidence against Kara Sullivan for months, ever since her threat in my shop. Private investigators cost money, but I'd liquidated my savings account and cashed in every favor I was owed. The truth about Rebecca Walsh was damaging, but it wasn't criminal. She was 19, and our brief relationship had been consensual. Kara's secrets, on the other hand, were far more interesting. Saturday afternoon arrived with perfect October weather, crisp air, brilliant sunshine, and the kind of autumn colors that made postcards. The festival was in full swing when I took the stage, looking out at a crowd of nearly 2,000 people, including most of Millbrook's permanent residents. I spotted Elizabeth near the craft booths, trying to blend into the crowd despite her newfound notoriety. Brad Morrison stood by the beer garden, flanked by what looked like private security, and there was Kara Sullivan positioned near the stage with a satisfied smile, probably expecting me to announce my surrender. "Good afternoon, Millbrook," I said into the microphone, my voice carrying across the square. "Beautiful day for a festival, isn't it?" Scattered applause and cheers from the crowd. Many people recognized me from the viral restaurant video, and I could see phones being raised to record whatever came next. "I want to thank you all for your support over the past few weeks. It's been a difficult time for my family, as I'm sure you know. But today, I want to share the truth about what's really been happening in our town." I clicked a button on my phone, and the large video screen behind me lit up with a slideshow of documents, photos, and text messages. 6 months ago, my wife Elizabeth began an affair with her boss, Bradley Morrison. But what you don't know is that this affair didn't happen by accident. It was orchestrated, planned, and executed by someone with a very personal grudge against me. The first image showed Kara Sullivan's text messages to Elizabeth, dating back 8 months. Messages encouraging Elizabeth to explore her options and suggesting that she deserved better than a small-town mechanic. Kara Sullivan has been my wife's best friend for 15 years. She was also an employee at my auto shop for 6 months in 2018 until I fired her for stealing from the cash register and selling customer information to identity thieves. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The screen showed police reports, bank records, and security camera footage of Kara taking money from the shop's register. Kara swore she'd get revenge on me for ruining her reputation, and she found the perfect way to do it, by destroying my marriage and turning my wife into a weapon against me. More text messages appeared on the screen, showing Kara introducing Elizabeth to Brad at a bar, encouraging their friendship, and providing detailed advice on how to conduct an affair without getting caught. But Kara's plan went deeper than just breaking up my marriage. She wanted to destroy my business, my reputation, and my relationship with my daughter. She planted evidence of financial irregularities in my shop's books, hoping to trigger an IRS investigation. She spread rumors about my mental health, trying to make me look unstable and dangerous. The crowd was murmuring now, anger building as they realized the scope of Kara's manipulation. I could see her pushing through the crowd, trying to reach the stage, but Jules and several other friends formed a human barrier. And when I started fighting back, when I refused to be the victim she wanted me to be, Kara tried to blackmail me with photos of a relationship I had with a consenting adult. She threatened to destroy an innocent young woman's reputation just to protect her own scheme. The final set of images showed Kara's financial records, payments from Brad Morrison's personal account, deposits that coincided with key moments in the affair timeline. She hadn't just orchestrated the affair, she'd been paid for it. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been watching a performance. Elizabeth's affair, Brad's arrogance, even my own public humiliation. It was all part of Kara Sullivan's revenge fantasy. She turned my wife into her puppet and my marriage into her personal entertainment. The crowd's mood had shifted from curious to angry. People were shouting questions, demanding answers. Elizabeth was crying, whether from shame or genuine shock, I couldn't tell. Brad Morrison looked like he was calculating the distance to the nearest exit. But Kara Sullivan stood frozen in the crowd, her face a mask of pure rage and defeat. "There's one more thing," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "Kara didn't just steal from my shop. She's been running a credit card skimming operation for the past 2 years, targeting elderly residents and small businesses throughout the county." The final image was a photo of Kara installing a skimming device on an ATM outside Millbrook's only bank. The timestamp showed it was taken just 3 days earlier. The FBI raided her apartment this morning and found over 50 stolen credit cards, along with equipment for manufacturing fake IDs. She's been using the money to fund her little revenge scheme, which makes this a federal crime. As if on cue, 2 men in dark suits pushed through the crowd toward Kara. FBI agents, just as I'd promised. Kara tried to run, but there was nowhere to go in the packed town square. She was tackled near the fountain, handcuffs clicking around her wrists as the crowd cheered. Elizabeth was sobbing now, the full weight of her manipulation finally hitting her. Brad Morrison had disappeared entirely, probably already on his way out of town. The festival had turned into a celebration of justice served, but I wasn't finished yet. "There's something else you should know," I announced, waiting for the crowd to quiet down. The affair between Elizabeth and Brad? It was never real. Oh, they slept together, but only because Kara convinced them it was the best way to hurt me. Brad was paying Kara to seduce my wife, and Elizabeth was so desperate to believe she deserved better that she went along with it. I pulled out a thick folder and held it up for everyone to see. This contains evidence of financial fraud, ethics violations, and conspiracy to commit identity theft. Elizabeth and Brad thought they were having a passionate affair, but they were really just following a script written by a sociopath with a grudge. The crowd erupted in a mixture of outrage and amazement. People were shouting questions, taking pictures, and sharing the moment across every social media platform imaginable. The festival had become the most dramatic event in Millbrook's history. As the FBI agents led Kara away, she caught my eye and mouthed a single word. Impressive. I smiled and gave her a small nod of acknowledgement. She'd played a good game, but she'd made one fatal error. She'd underestimated the depths of my own capacity for revenge. Elizabeth approached the stage as the crowd began to disperse, her face streaked with tears and mascara. Nathan, I didn't know. I thought I was making my own choices. You were, I said, stepping down from the stage to face her. You chose to believe that you were too good for our life together. You chose to throw away 15 years of marriage for a fantasy. Kara might have provided the opportunity, but you made the decision. Is there any way to fix this? I looked at my wife, my soon-to-be ex-wife, and felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. She'd been manipulated, but she'd also been willing to be manipulated because it gave her permission to do what she'd wanted to do anyway. No, Liz. There's no going back from this. But maybe now you can start being honest about who you really are instead of pretending to be who you think you should be. As I walked away from the festival, my phone buzzed with notifications, interview requests, job offers from other towns, and messages of support from people who'd followed the story online. The video of my revelation was already going viral, shared thousands of times with hashtags like Mosh Revenge Served and Justice for Nathan. But the most important message came from Emma. Dad, I'm proud of you. Can I come home now? I smiled and typed back, always. Behind me, the festival continued, but the real show was over. Kara Sullivan would spend the next decade in federal prison. Elizabeth's legal career was finished, and she'd be lucky to find work as a paralegal in another state. Brad Morrison had fled Millbrook like the coward he'd always been. And me? I was finally free. They'd called me the villain when this started, and maybe they were right. But sometimes the world needs a villain, someone willing to do what heroes won't, to go where heroes fear to tread. Sometimes justice doesn't come from courts or karma or divine intervention. Sometimes justice comes from a man with nothing left to lose and the patience to plan the perfect revenge. I climbed into my truck and drove home, leaving the wreckage of my old life behind me. Tomorrow, I'd start building something new. But tonight, I was going to enjoy the sweet taste of victory.